Good evening, I'm Emily Plath, and tonight on Sparty Lit News, we'll be exploring the topics of banned and challenged books and their impact in the classroom. We will be going over three specific books: The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, and Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Then we'll have a guest speaker from Brighton High School to talk more in detail about these specific books. Before that interview, a little background on the history of banned and challenged books. There's a difference between banning a book and challenging it. A challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objections of a person or group. A banning is the removal of those books. Books are often challenged because people feel that the material in the book is inappropriate for readers. According to the Office of Intellectual Freedoms, the top 3 reasons for challenging a book are: the material was considered to be sexually explicit, it contained offensive language, and it was unsuited to any age group. Most challenges are unsuccessful and materials are retained in the school collection or library because there are many people that feel that the offensive materials are things that students need to be exposed to. Now you're probably wondering, who would want to challenge a book or ban it? Well, most people who challenge books are unsatisfied with their children being exposed to viewpoints that disagree with their own. Now you're probably sitting on the edge of your seat thinking, oh my goodness, my favorite book could be banned or challenged at any moment. But don't be too stressed out about it yet. Like we talked about before, there's a big difference between banning a book and challenging it. And most of the time that books are challenged, they don't end up being banned. Even books that are banned are only banned for a short period of time, and then they get returned back to the shelf. Some of the all-time classic books that are commonly read in high school classes have been banned or challenged. These include Of Mice and Men, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Lord of the Flies. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck is the only book of these 3 that has actually been banned in addition to being challenged. For Lord of the Flies, we found that it was challenged based on violence, language, the demoralization of humans, and the racist tendencies of some of the characters. For Of Mice and Men, it was actually banned and challenged because of language, sex, and using God's name in vain. We found Huck Finn was challenged because of racial slurs, slavery, class, the N-word, and the hypocrisy of Christian democratic society that felt it was okay to buy and sell people. So today, we've discussed about banning and challenging books, and 3 specific examples of that. Now we need to know how those examples relate to the curriculum. And with that, I introduce our special guest, Sylvia Dickinson. Thanks so much for coming out to talk to us, Sylvia.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Emily. I'm honored to be here.
Great. So we've already told our viewers a little bit about banning and challenging books, and the 3 books that we'll be focusing on today.
Sounds like we're ready to get started.
So you're a teacher from Brighton High School in Brighton, Michigan. Can you tell us a little bit about the curriculum that surrounds each one of these books?
Of course I can. As far as when curriculum goes, we don't really have those for novels. Instead, we really have specific objectives in like reading and writing and research and speaking that we have to achieve according to the state benchmarks that we then tailor to one specific novel.
That sounds interesting. So my next question is, why are these books specifically used in the curriculum?
Well, for each novel we teach, we do focus on vocabulary and literary terminology. For Of Mice and Men, we do like framing and foreshadowing, and in Lord of the Flies, we specifically cover allegory and symbolism. We also have certain focus questions for each novel that help the students think critically and help them make connections about the literature in the students' lives. Within each unit, we also have certain writing objectives as well. Another thing we do in American and Brit-Lit is we tailor the writings to specific literary periods and the historical context. So for in American literature, we study rationalism and romanticism and realism, and specifically to Huck Finn, regionalism. Also, while they're reading the novels, we also bring in companion pieces that are related in some way, like poetry or short stories.
Wow. So with no teaching experience under my belt, that seems like a lot to process and a lot to teach. I feel like we could definitely talk about it for much longer, but we need to move on. So, does the material in these books that made them banned or challenged help to teach the students the points you're trying to make?
I'm not entirely quite sure what you mean. Can you clarify that?
For example, the use of the N-word in Huck Finn. Does that provide the students with better understanding of the time frame?
Okay, yeah. When I used to teach Huck Finn, I actually started with an old Nightline video about the controversy of that word, even within the African American community. We talk about the sensitivity of the word when reading the material and why and what Twain's intent was for using it so much. And the great thing about Huck Finn is that a lot of my students notice the different tones that certain characters have when using that word. So we definitely need to discuss the reasons why this book has been challenged in our classroom. I think that challenging students with sensitive material is a great way to get them discussing about important themes and topics in these books. When discussing Lord of the Flies, it's extremely thought-provoking when we talk about the violence. And most students are horrified by the bullying of Piggy. Thus, they can relate what we talk about in class to their own life and experiences that they have in events.
Definitely. I never thought about it in that way, and it seems like an extremely enriching experience. I can see that as a student for me growing up, that would have been very beneficial. So within the curriculum that you've told us about for these books, how do the reasons that these books are banned or challenged make for good teaching materials?
Well, we certainly teach mature books like Of Mice and Men, Huck Finn, and Lord of the Flies. And we definitely consider the controversial issues when we consider teaching them. And it's often for the reasons why that they were banned or challenged or whatever it is that validate our choice to teach them. There are less controversial books that teach racism and sexism and all these other things. But I stand by the notion of preserving our literary history. I want my students exposed to the classics, pieces of literature that have stood the test of time. So at BHS, when we teach a novel, we usually teach the whole novel, not just the stylistic elements, but the rich themes and the historical context that are part of the novel as well.
That sounds great. So what specifically in Huck Finn helps you teach your students, and what does it teach them?
Students can somewhat relate to Huck's journey. There's discussion to be had about Huck's natural tendency to want to help Jim versus societal influence that they're supposed to judge or hate Jim. At BHS, we call it the heart versus head battle. It's such a wonderful internal conflict to study. I stand by Huck Finn because it exposes racism and sexism and all of these other things in just one novel. Not to mention the fact that it exposes things like religious hypocrisy, Southern feuding and violence. Plus, it's a terrific example of regionalism, dialect and colloquialism, and not to mention, of course, satire.
That sounds very interesting. We never thought about it that way when I was in high school. It sounds like you go into way more detail. So because of that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Of Mice and Men, since that was one of the books that was actually banned.
As far as Of Mice and Men goes, it's very much the same thing I said about Huck Finn. The difference is that the specific concepts we discuss are not just about racism, they're about sexism as well. For example, Curly's wife. She doesn't even have a name. She's Curly's '(S) wife. She's an object, a possession. We talk about social misfits, poverty, social class systems, the Depression, and again about the writer's style and literary elements. The scene I believe in chapter 4 with Crooks and Lenny and Curly's wife and Candy are all in Crooks's room, and they're talking about social misfits. It's so powerful. It really is. It's something that is a great teaching element.
So, for those of us who haven't read the book in a little while, can you explain that scene to us in a little more detail, please?
Yeah, basically what happens is that Curly's wife comes in and is making fun of him for being social misfits, even though she's a social misfit too. And it's because of this reason that makes this scene so powerful, is because it shows that it doesn't matter what class someone's in. You can be a social misfit no matter what.
I can definitely see what you mean by powerful. Seems like a great teaching tool. So, can you give us some specific examples from Lord of the Flies?
Of course I can. Lord of the Flies is amazing to teach if you zero in on the allegorical symbolism. My students are really enjoying the novel and piecing together the deeper allegorical meaning of the text. Also, it's great to relate the characters to the students themselves. Just yesterday I lectured on Piggy. We know that Piggy has terrific ideas and is often ignored until Ralph, who's another character in the book, says the exact same thing. We talked about how Piggy is overlooked because of his weight or his appearance or his weaknesses. Why is a character with some of the best ideas ignored or bullied? You see, in my 4th hour, there's an autistic girl who's who's often on the outside looking in. Oftentimes when she speaks or adds to the class, there's a lot of eyes that are rolled and a lot of quiet giggles. The week before spring break, she was absent, so I talked to the class about their behavior. I even used the word bully. And by the way, this girl is the one who sets the curve on almost all of the quizzing tests, and she's a solid A student. Anyway, when I lectured on Piggy, and we went into detail about how he was being bullied, and the students felt really bad for him and were really, really upset with of how the boys had treated him. I saw my moment and I took it. I just said, sounds familiar, right? It was a great moment to share with my students, to be able to connect the literature to a real life situation, and I'm sure most of my students won't forget it.
It's nice to know that you can teach them more than just what they're going to learn on an exam.
Of course. And and as I've said before, there are so many other books that are less controversial that can teach historical context and literary elements. But once again, as well as I've said before, these books are incredible tools to teach so many different lessons. And I'm really, really glad that Brighton Area Schools agrees with me on their worth.
Definitely. I'd have to agree with you on that after our whole conversation. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. I very much enjoyed your company.
Well, thank you, Emily, for having me on the show. I am very honored to be here, and I could sit around and talk about literature all day.
So I hope all of you viewers out there had as much fun as we did. On next week's show, we're going to talk about the connection between books and movies that books are made out of.
Sounds fun.
Which are better, and how much does the story change from book to movie? Tune in next week to find out. Until then, I'm Emily Plath, keeping literature alive on Sparty Lit News.